Hi, I'm Colleen. Let's do a December wrap-up. First off, I apologize if you hear anything weird. We're having a crazy windstorm, so my house isn't haunted. It's just wind slamming against my windows. Secondly, I read a lot of books in December for me, so I'm going to try to go kind of fast. I read 13 books. I usually read more around like 8, 9, so we'll go through these quickly. I definitely run the gamut of books I absolutely love to books I really didn't like this time, and I have one rather controversial opinion on a very popular author on social media right now. Let's get started. I read one nonfiction book this month, and it was Beautiful Country by Julie Wang. And I started this in November, so I talked about it a little bit in my November wrap up, but I finished it, like December 2nd or whatever, so it counts as a December read. This is a memoir I got from Book of the Month. It follows Qian, who, when she is very young, I think around 6 years old, her family immigrates to the United States from China, and they are living as undocumented immigrants in New York City. I would really recommend this book to people who are looking for a nonfiction book for a book club, because there is a lot to discuss and unpack about their lives, the relationships Qian has with her parents, the relationships her parents have with each other, what it felt like to be living in the 90s, undocumented in the United States. It's a little bit of a slow read, which was kind of why it took me so long to get through it, but the story was very good and the writing is very good. It definitely has like a book club book feel, so I wouldn't pick this up if you're looking for something light or like breezy to blow through, but something if you want to read something with like a little bit more meat to it. I gave this, I think, 3.75 stars. I was coming off another slow read when I read it, so I wasn't necessarily in the mood for a slow read, but I still really enjoyed the time I spent with this book. Next, I read 2 Christmas books this December, which are always kind of weird to review in January, but they were both actually collections, and the first one was My True Love Gave to Me, which I lost the dust jacket for years ago. I have read this every Christmas season for the past 8 years, and this year it was really obvious that I've read it too much. So I am going to retire it. Even though I do love it, I'll probably read it again in a few years, but I definitely won't read it in December 2022. It's 12 young adult romances running the gamut of the writers like Rainbow Roll has a story in here, Laini Taylor has a story in here, Matt de la Peña has a story in here. So many famous authors are in here. Oh, what's his name? David Leviathan, who's one of my favorite YA authors, has a story in here. I'll just really quickly tell you my 3 favorites. They are Angels in the Snow by Matt de la Peña. And I'm sorry, I have like a horrible Spanish accent, so I really can't say like Peña how you're supposed to say it, but I know how it's supposed to sound. That is about Shea, who is in college, and it's his first Christmas away from home. And I really like that story because it's not like a super happy Christmas story. There's a lot of grief involved in the story. He lost his mom recently, and he really doesn't have any money, and he's sort of going hungry for Christmas. And it's a lovely, beautiful story about him being snowed in at an apartment that he is sort of like apartment sitting. The second story I absolutely adore in this book is called It's a Yuletide Miracle, Charlie Brown, and it is by Stephanie Perkins. This follows Marigold, who wants to surprise her mother with a Christmas tree. They are also going through a very hard time in their lives. I like sort of dark stories. And her father has recently left them, and they are trying to sort of piece their life back together, leaving their big house and crammed into a small apartment. There is a very friendly, handsome, with a great voice, Christmas tree salesman named North, who ends up having a relationship with her. It's a very cute story. Everyone I've recommended this book to always loves that story. And lastly, my absolute favorite story in this book is The Girl Who Woke the Dreamer by Laini Taylor. I don't know if this is related to her book Strange the Dreamer, because I haven't read it, but this short story is fantastic. We follow Neve, who lives in, I think, a fantasy world, but it feels like very Dickensian. She is an orphan who is now aged out of being an orphan and is proposed to by the most vile man you can imagine, and she doesn't really have any option but to marry him, except she prays to this sort of pagan god of the island she lives in, and he awakens. And it is so beautiful. If you're familiar with Laini Taylor's writing, it's like reading poetry. And if you find reading an entire book of hers daunting, because it is, you know, hard to read poetry line after line after line, I'd really recommend this story because it is only about 40 or 50 pages, I think, and it is just beautiful. The next collection of Christmas stories I read was Walking in a Witchy Wonderland by Juliette Cross, and I will be replacing My True Love Gave to Me with this next year. I'm definitely going to reread this next year. So it's been no secret that I've been absolutely obsessed with this series, Stay a Spell. I've read everything that's been out in the last couple months, and Juliette Cross just announced that the next book, which is called Practice Safe Hex, and it's about Livy and Gareth, is coming out in June, and I'm so excited. And she announced the titles for the rest of the books in the series, so I'm so excited. I cannot wait to read the rest of them. So in this book, we get what I would say is 3 extended epilogues, a prologue, and a beautiful novella. So in the first story, which is called Bewitch You a Merry Christmas, we are back with Evie and Matteo, who are the heroine and hero from the first book, Wolf Gone Wild. This I thought was probably the weakest story, but it was still very charming. It's basically 2 people who are in love and like can't get any alone time together, and they're trying to find alone time. But it was still very sweet. It takes place right after Wolf Gone Wild, so not into the future. If you've read the books, some stuff has happened in their lives as we get into the later books, but this is like right after their book. The next is Rocking Around the Xmas Tree, and it is Devraj and Isadora's story. And this one's kind of hilarious, and I don't want to give away too much, but it has to do with a Secret Santa exchange and like a naughty Christmas gift that sort of like changes the atmosphere of their house. And it was very fun and very hot, and I loved it. The next story is the novella that's in here. So these first 2 are much shorter, and this one is like, I think, 120 pages of the book. And it's a romance between JJ and Charlie, who are 2 minor characters who I'd always liked. But when I read that they were going to get their own story in here, I was kind of like, okay, I don't super care about their love stories. It was fantastic. It was beautiful. It was lovely. I didn't know I needed their story, but I did. And I will obviously reread it every year. Also, you should read the dedication because it has to do with their story, and it made their story like that much more important to this world. Next, we've got You're a Mean One, Mr. Grimm, and this is the one that's sort of like a prologue. So it introduces us to Lavinia and Gareth, who have the next book, and they're definitely like an enemies to lovers story. Gareth is a Grimm, which in this world are supernaturals that sort of like bring out the worst in people. And I shouldn't say the worst, more like your basest desires. And Livy is a super positive witch, and they are working together even though they really don't want to. So I'm usually not like an enemies to lovers person or a workplace romance person, but because it's Juliette Cross, I know I'm going to love it. And I've also really been waiting to have a Grimm hero because she's been introducing them throughout the books, but we haven't really met any of them. And lastly is Jingle Spells, which is Nico and Violet's story, and it was super fun. Nico and Violet are probably my favorite couple of this series, so I really loved their story. Quick spoiler, 3, 2, 1. Their story follows them babysitting Matteo and Evie's triplets so they can go out. So it's kind of like a Are We Ready to Be Parents? But in a really funny way because the kids are magical, and obviously the kids eventually go home and you get your Nico and Violet steam that we all love from, what was their book called? Witches Get Stitches. Let's move on to the mysteries and thrillers I read this month. The first being The Maid by Nita Prose. I got an ARC from NetGalley, so there is the cover, and it came out January 4th, which I think I'm filming on January 5th, so it's already out. This has been like a super anticipated read, and it's been on a lot of people's like books they're so excited for 2022. It was kind of an interesting mystery for me to read. The beginning is slow, which I wasn't expecting a mystery to have a slow beginning, but we really get like a sense of the world before the actual action happens. The main character is Molly, and she is a maid at a very fancy hotel and walks into a murder scene. And that's kind of how the setup is. Molly is clearly neurodivergent, but there's no diagnosis and there's no sort of herself explaining, because she is the narrator explaining her diagnosis, which felt a little old-fashioned to me because she's really just like, a lot of the characters like, you're a strange bird, Molly. And that kind of bothered me. I don't know what sort of experience the author has with a neurodivergent diagnosis or if she has one. I couldn't find anything in her bio about it. Moving on from that into the mystery, there were certain things about the book I didn't like in terms of like a lot of characters were really mean to Molly, and I understand that like that's realistic, but it's hard. It's hard for me to read. It just was. There were parts I really liked. Molly has a great relationship with the doorman that I really liked. Molly is grieving her grandma who is taking care of her, and I liked that portion too. The book has 3 separate endings, which was a little odd for me. We get the catch the baddie ending, we get a trial ending, and then we also get an epilogue ending that's like years later, which felt a little bit like too much for me. There's a bit of a rushed romance thrown in, which also felt a little out of place. I don't read a ton of mysteries. I'd say like about 15% of the books I read are mysteries, so sometimes I worry that like I'm not super familiar with like the cozy mystery vibes people are looking for. But for me, this book was a solid 3-star read. I thought it was fine. It definitely dragged at points. I definitely think it could have been shorter by 50 pages at least. But overall, you know, it was still fun to read. And the other mystery thriller I read this month was The Wife Upstairs by Rachel Hawkins. This was a book of the month book, but I bought it at Half Price Books. So I don't have my book of the month stamp over there. This is a modern retelling of Jane Eyre in sort of a thriller type setting. Again, there were certain things I loved about this book and certain things I thought were kind of strange. I loved the narration style. It was really cool. We alternate narrating between Jane and Rochester's first wife, the wife upstairs, who in this goes by B, but her name is Bertha, like in the original. We're set kind of in a weird suburbia in Alabama where everyone's really wealthy, but Jane is an outsider. Jane didn't really feel like Jane Eyre. She definitely had like more of an edge. She has the whole orphan thing going for her and not really having support of family or friends, but she is involved in some criminal activity, which felt not extremely like Jane Eyre. I liked this book. It was like a fine thriller. It was a fun read. I didn't love it. I thought the ending was strange, but apparently some people really love the ending, so whatever floats your boat. But I gave this, I think, like 3.75 stars. Like, it was a fun way to spend a few hours a couple days in a row. So I read one book, which I would classify either as literary fiction or magical realism, which is what Book of the Month classified it as, and that was The History of Wild Places by Shea Earnshaw. I loved this book. This was a 5-star read for me. It's a little hard to talk about without giving stuff away, so I'm going to do my best to give you a spoiler-free intro to it. We begin the book with Travis, who is someone who is psychic, and he gets paid to find missing people. He can kind of touch things that belong to people and then like follow their psychic trail. He's very depressed at the beginning. He doesn't really have like a direction in life, but he takes on a case of a missing children's book author, and her parents are looking for her, and she has been gone for a while. I want to say 5 years when the story opens, but her mom has sort of reservations about him looking for her because she thinks that she doesn't want to be found. Her daughter doesn't want to be found. The author, Maggie St. James, had abandoned her car in the Pacific Northwest, and Travis goes to the spot where her car was abandoned and is able to pick up a psychic trail from her. He follows it into the woods, and then we sort of stop following Travis. It's also winter at this point, and it's like so creepy, and I loved it. I love a creepy winter setting. I do. I know a lot of people love like a creepy autumnal setting, but I like a creepy winter setting. Winter is so much scarier for me than fall because of the elements. We then jump to new narrators, and you don't know when we are. Are we later? Are we earlier than Travis? We're not really sure. We have 3 new narrators, Calla, Theo, and Bee. Calla and Bee are sisters, and Theo and Calla are married. And they live in a house together in this community. And it's very like creepy vibes community, cut off from the rest of the world, afraid that they can't leave. If they leave, they'll get ill. I loved it. There is a twist, and I read a couple reviewers that said they guessed the twist. I didn't guess the twist. The twist hit me in the head. So I really enjoyed it. It's really beautifully written. It was a great read. I recommend if you want something that's like feels just like something's inching up the back of your neck, I would recommend A History of Wild Places by Shea Earnshaw. So all the rest of the books I read were romance, which is a lot. I think I have 7 more books to talk about, and they're all romance. The first being It Ends With Us by Colleen Hoover, which this is the one I said at the beginning I have some controversial opinions on, and this is the one I have some controversial opinions on. So Colleen Hoover's like exploding all over social media right now. Like literally 4 months ago, I'd never heard of her, and now it's like every Bookstagram post is about her. I haven't seen like as many on BookTube, but Bookstagram is definitely like really into Colleen Hoover right now. So I got this as an add-on for Book of the Month, and mainly because she's been recommended and because this was billed as a romance. Here's the thing though, this book's not a romance, and it's not. Like, it's not. There are genre expectations for romance, and this is not one. This is a women's fiction book, and that's fine. I don't read women's fiction though, so that just is what it is. A romance is a book with a happily ever after, and the main point of the book is the romance. Now this review is going to have some spoiler-y stuff in it, so if you haven't read this and you really want to, skip ahead to whatever, like 3 minutes when I'm talking about the next book, when I'm holding up Lore, Olympus, which is going to be the next one I talk about. This is a book about a young woman processing her teenage years and living in an abusive relationship in her 20s. And that's not a romance at all. So there's 2 men in her life, one of whom was named Atlas, and he was her high school boyfriend, sort of. And then her current beau / husband at one point, his name is Ryle. And Lily, who's our main character, is looking through her old journals from when she was a teenager and trying to figure out her life in her 20s. This book felt very young to me. Not young adult, but like new adult. And that's another genre I don't read. I definitely read more like firmly stuff in the adult vein. I had a lot of problems with this book, and I'm like a big believer that there are no bad books. Books just aren't for certain people, and this book was not for me. I didn't enjoy her relationship with Atlas at all. I have a lot of issues with him as a person. Not anything to do with him being homeless, but him taking advantage of a 16-year-old. I had a lot of issues with how the abusive relationship resolved itself. This book was not for me. It's a fast read. The font's really big. I've seen so many people just say like they sobbed reading this book and it changed their life or whatever, and it just didn't do that for me. I didn't cry, and I am a huge crier. I don't think any of the books I read this month made me cry, but I cry all the time reading. But this book didn't make me cry. It didn't really make me feel anything other than kind of annoyed it wasn't billed as women's fiction because I wasted a free credit on it. And I really wanted to buy Tastemakers, and I didn't buy Tastemakers. I bought this instead. 2.75 stars. I mean, for me, the difference between 2.75 stars and 3 stars is kind of like the difference between this book was fine and I didn't like this book. And I did not like this book. I'm sorry to all Colleen Hoover's diehard fans. I didn't like this book to the point that I don't think I'll ever read another Colleen Hoover, which is too bad because I know there's a lot of other ones people really like, but this one, it just kind of put a sour taste in my mouth. Moving on to Lore Olympus. I liked this book quite a bit. Now, I had read the webtoon series a while ago, a long time ago, but I have a really hard time reading webtoons on my computer because I don't have an iPad and I really hate scrolling. So I knew it was going to be published, and so I was like, I'll just buy it because it's beautiful to look at, so why don't I want to own it? This covered about 50% of it was what stuff I'd already read, and 50% was stuff I hadn't gotten to. So that was fun because I was a little worried when I bought it that I would have already read all of this, but I hadn't. It is a Hades Persephone retelling, and I know sometimes I'm a stinker about those because I have like deep Greek mythology roots, but I like this one because we feel super removed from the actual myth. I think that retellings can be done really well, and I think Rachel Smyth did an amazing job with this retelling. Also, her art is gorgeous, so how can you not love it? Honestly, I would say the story is fine, but the art is flippin' beautiful. Just like the way she mixes colors, the pinks and the blues are just so gorgeous. Just like the way she does the different shadings of the blues and the whites mixed together with the pinks. So much fun. I can't wait for the next one. I'm definitely going to continue to buy these. I think that she is a brilliant artist and did a really good job with a retelling that a lot of people do. I gave this 4.25 stars. I've already flipped through it again a bunch. My daughters are both loving to flip through it, or not both, all three of them. All my daughters are loving flipping through this because it's just really pretty. Next, I read One Night with You by Sophie Jordan, and this was like a regular 4-star historical romance read. It's an older one of her books. I think it came out in 2008 maybe, and it definitely feels, yeah, 2008. It definitely feels like an older romance. Like, it's not as good as the stuff she's been releasing lately, but it was still very enjoyable. We have Jane in this book, who is a widow, and her deceased husband's family treat her terribly. They basically just make her be free childcare for them. And then we have Seth, who is a man that she was in love with when she was a teenager, and he chose her sister, who rejected him, but it still broke her heart. They meet up when Jane is in disguise, and it's one of those relationships in which she's in disguise and he's really liking her in disguise, but then they're also re-meeting as themselves, and he's also kind of liking her then too. Very fun, read it really fast, solid 4-star romance. So the last series that I read to compromise my last 4 books are a few books in Kerrigan Byrne's Highland Magic series. I had read the first 3 before, which I talked about in my fall reads, and then decided to read 4 through 7 so I could hit 75 books on my 2021 reading goals. So the first one is called Highland Devil, and in this one we have a banshee heroine, a lord hero, and she is sent to murder him, but then also, is she in love with him? Which, this one was good. I gave this one like 4.5 stars. The next one is Highland Darkness, which we have one of her sisters who's also a banshee, and a romance with a druid who is trying to kill all fae, which banshees. This was another one that was like 4.5 star read. The next one, book 6, was called Highland Destiny. This was a 5-star read. We've got a banshee, the last banshee sister, but she's a banshee who's never murdered anybody. And she's been a banshee for a while now. And a berserker who is terrorizing the land, and she needs to murder him. But when she shows up, he's gorgeous and kisses her and realizes that she's his mate, but also realizes that he should probably be murdered for what he's done. So they decide, let's have like an amazing night, and then I'll kill you in the morning. And that was so much fun, the I kill you in the morning part, because it was like, well, I'm gonna murder you in the morning, but should we hook up one more time? I loved this one. I will definitely reread this one. And then the last one was Highland Warlord. And this one is about another berserker, which a lot of these books have berserkers in it. Just the first 2 I read didn't. And a druid priestess who knows their soulmates, and the berserker knows they're soulmates, but when he's not his berserker, he doesn't like her. And he's like mean to her and doesn't want to hang out with her, but the berserker is like super gentle and kind to her. And I loved that juxtaposition of, instead of the berserker, who are supposed to be these like crazy animal men, being like cruel and rough, he's like so gentle and kind and like taking care of her and like carrying her hundreds of miles. And the other guy is like, I don't want any part of you, lady. It was super fun. That one was another 5-star read. That wraps up my December reads. So overall, they were great. I had a really good reading month. I really enjoyed it, and I'm excited for January. I hope you read some good stuff. I hope you liked some reviews. I hope you're not mad at me about my It Ends With Us review, but I cannot be the only one. A lot of times I feel like when books are super popular, people aren't honest. I cannot be the only one who felt this way about this book. Maybe I am. We'll see. I hope you are in the middle of a good book, about to start reading a good book, or about to start writing a great book. See ya.